Yeah, regarding the period of reform and positive growth that you mentioned, to what extent was NAFTA a factor in addressing that? You know, what's the fair assessment on the Canadian side as to whether there was a net plus for Canada or net loss for Canada, or both sides, America and the U.S., won out? And then in addition to that, I assume reform would not have been possible unless, you know, you're a good producing country, and obviously the natural resources of your country are prodigious, you know, lumber, agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. To what extent is the environmentalist movement a negative, would it have a negative impact on your continued development as a producing nation?
Well, let me start with your first question about NAFTA. In our book, The Canadian Century, we talk about the redemptive decade. What we mean by that redemptive decade is that there was a whole decade-long period during which a number of reforms were put in place that allowed Canada to enjoy the success that I've described. I've focused in my remarks today on the end of the redemptive decade, on the fiscal reforms, but actually we say that the redemptive decade begins with the free trade agreement with the United States in 1988. It underpins a great deal of what happened afterwards. And one of the great things about trade, and this is true internationally, it's certainly true between Canada and the United States, is that international trade grows more quickly than national economies do. And so we created a set of institutions between Canada and the United States which has unleashed a tremendous period of growth and prosperity for both countries. You know, I got to tell you that I'm kind of mystified when I hear Americans talk about international trade and NAFTA, you know, the deindustrialization of America. So, you know, Canada, which has a free trade agreement with the United States and has huge bilateral trade in which we buy a tremendous amount of manufactured goods from you guys, and we run quite a balanced trade relationship. We get called the bad guys. Well, China, who has no free trade agreement with the United States, you know, runs a foreign exchange program which intentionally underprices the cost of their exports to you, runs a huge trade imbalance with you for reasons that I think are politically motivated, amongst other things. And Canada and NAFTA are somehow the bad guy. I'm mystified by this. On any objective reading of what's happened between Canada and the United States under NAFTA, it has been immensely positive for both countries. And indeed, if you come to my lecture this evening for the National Security Forum, I'm going to be talking about the emerging continental security infrastructure and the emerging continental economic integration which characterizes North America, and the institutions that we need to create in order to manage those relationships. So I think it's fantastically clear that NAFTA has been good for people on both sides of the border. You asked me about the environmental movement. You know, I would venture to say that Canadians are pretty environmentally conscious people, and so we're not by any means anti-environment, but there are obviously extremists in the environmental movement who are, not to put too fine a point on it, intentionally mischaracterizing things that are happening in Canada. There are Canadians involved in this, so I don't mean to point fingers at foreigners. You know, the whole way that the oil sands in Alberta, for instance, are characterized is a gross misrepresentation of what's going on. Both Canadians and Albertans, in particular, are working very hard to make sure that the oil sands developments are carried out in an environmentally responsible way. And I got to tell you that in a world in which America is quite properly focused on reducing its dependence on dangerous sources of foreign oil. The fact that the oil sands are on your border, that we can recover near 10% of the reserves in the oil sands, and that represents an amount of oil equivalent to the entire conventional reserves of Saudi Arabia. This is an incredibly positive thing for the United States and part of the emerging economic integration that I've talked about, which is tremendously positive for both parties. So, responsible environmentalism, absolutely. Irresponsible environmentalism that mischaracterizes and misdescribes what Canada is doing. We'll fight it to the bitter end.
You keep talking about that oil shale, you're going to kill off the electric car. You're going to live it on Canada.
You, at the beginning, you said the sort of the imperative to dealing with the fiscal issues was making this moral argument. Can you
Yes.
expand on kind of how that narrative went? Just as an example here, the response to the State of the Union address was sort of cast in this, talking about the downside of excessive spending and that sort of thing, and the Republicans were totally, panned as just a horrible view of life and that sort of thing. So how do we get started on this moral pitch?
Well, I mean, it has to transcend politics. You can't get into this with the intention of making it sound like you're making the Republicans' argument. What we achieved was to remove this as an area of partisan bickering, and we did that, as I say, by making the argument in a pretty concerted way that irresponsible public finances don't benefit anybody, and that they are an irresponsible transfer of today's consumption, the cost of today's consumption to future generation. I think, especially in retrospect, my hat's off to Canadians who were, I think perhaps inarticulately, but very actively turning these facts about where Canada was headed over in the back of their minds. And they were quite anxious about the way that Canada was headed, but they couldn't articulate what it was about it that was upsetting them, and they certainly weren't able to articulate the solution. What we did was we were able to articulate, to put into easily understandable form a narrative that took the anxieties of Canadians and explained why the anxiety was grounded in reality. I'm not in a position to tell you what Americans are thinking, but I have to say I would be surprised if Americans were not anxious at the direction that things are going. And that's not a partisan comment. I mean, whether it's Republicans or Democrats, I mean, it seems to me over the last 3 election cycles, the underlying message has been in every election is throw the bastards out. So that's an inarticulate expression of an anxiety about the direction that things are going. What you need now to do, I should phrase it that way, what we did in similar circumstances was to channel that anxiety by giving a narrative that explained why the anxiety was reasoned, that it wasn't extremist and it wasn't disproportionate to the problem that was faced. We gave people a moral hook to hang their hat on. That is to say that most people are willing to make sacrifices so that future generations, and particularly their own children, will enjoy a better world than they enjoyed themselves. That's something that you can actually get most people. And people say, well, the senior citizens, they're this incredibly well-organized lobby. They'll never agree. I got to tell you, you don't know most of the grandparents I know, if you think that. Most of the grandparents I know are willing to make tremendous sacrifices to ensure that their grandchildren enjoy a better life than they did. You have to find a way to put it to them in those terms. If, however, they look at the American politics, let's say, and they see a system in which if they are asked to make sacrifices, they believe that those sacrifices will only be captured by other people who will enjoy benefits that they are enjoying themselves instead, they'll never agree to that. This is why it's terribly important to put in place the kind of approach that I've mentioned, in which people have confidence that everyone is being asked to sacrifice. The sacrifices are proportionate to the contribution you make to the problem, that once the sacrifice is made, you will solve the problem. The people don't want to have made a sacrifice and then find out the problem is just as bad as it was before. And I think that's what we did. Does that make sense?
Bruno, I love the way you framed that. If Pat Quinn was wrong, and I think we probably agree that he was, to raise taxes here in Illinois, and if the answer for the rich and the wealthy corporations, so to speak, if the answer is not, if their answer for shared sacrifice is not raising taxes, and the public employee unions are supposed to give up the size of their pensions or some of their pay, and the Medicare and all the other things are supposed to sacrifice by having a lower benefit level or stretched out over a longer period or whatever, what would you say is an appropriate shared sacrifice of the so-called, and I'm looking at this more from the liberals' argumentation line, or their line of argumentation, what would be the appropriate shared sacrifice for the large corporation and the wealthy, who I think is everything that makes a dollar?
Well, look, let me reframe a little bit what I said about what Pat Quinn has done. It's Pat Quinn. You see, he did the tax rise without all of the conditions that I attached to the success of a program like this. The tax rise is largely just off on its own, and maybe a bit here and a bit there. It's not a comprehensive program like I've described. My argument would be, and this might be perhaps unpopular with some people in the room, is if you have a comprehensive program that you commit yourself to in advance, and you have measurable goals, never underestimate the value of a simple, observable goal like reaching budget balance. That was a tremendous anchor for our reform programs. Everybody was focused on balancing the budget. That was the great objective we were reaching for. When you've got that objective in place and you have a program to reach it, then you come to the problem of how do you make credible the claim that everybody's contributing. When you have all that I've described in place, I actually think it's okay to raise taxes, because then you have the discipline to make sure that the money that you've raised is going to the objective. I think that's what Pat Quinn does not have right now. Right? And what we did in Canada was we had some modest tax increases, but within a couple of years, we were able to start giving the tax increases back to people through tax cuts. And we had one budget that brought in $100 billion worth of tax cuts over a period of time. It was, in Canadian terms, a huge amount. And we brought corporate income taxes down very significantly as part of a competitiveness strategy for Canada. So you have to have a credible medium-term plan. Tax increases, if there are to be tax increases, have to be part of those objectives. There has to be measurable goalposts, and then the tax increases are perhaps necessary, not actually so much to raise revenue, but as part of the credibility of the program to say everybody's contributing. And as soon as the reason for the